Hello and welcome to the Consistency Project podcast. I'm Patrick Cummings here, as always, with E.C. Sinkowski. Every week we aim to simplify the principles and practices of nutrition, health, and fitness. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Hello, E.C. How are you?
Hey, good. How are you?
Wondrous. Good to see you. Welcome, everybody. We are, this week, we're going to talk about which is better, diet or exercise. We are going to settle the age-old debate. And I assume we're going to also define what better is in this context. I'm excited to get into this. I think we're going to have to. Before we do, quick mention, EC's got a 10-week accelerator coming up soon. It's a hands-on, small group program where you'll develop a personalized nutrition plan using the 3 pillars method, 800 grams of fruits and veggies every day, 0.7 grams of protein per pound of body weight, and personalized calorie targets. This is an evidence-based approach that is sustainable, flexible, and designed for real results, not quick fixes. And like I said, it's coming up soon. The next cohort starts in January. Sign up at optimizemenutrition.com/accelerator. Where shall we begin? Do it. Where shall we begin with this debate, with this question around which is better, diet or exercise?
Yeah, so this really got started because Pat Barber, a longtime friend from CrossFit days,
Pat
Barber. He sent me this clip from an episode of the Coach 'Em Up podcast. And the clip definitely got a good amount of traction on social media. I've actually seen other people kind of react to it. But the gist of the clip, which certainly has a little bit more clickbait element to it than the entire podcast, as clips do. But the gist of the clip is that cardio fitness is more important than nutrition for health. So you're like, better for what? Better for health. Cardio fitness is more important than nutrition for health. And so that's really the topic of today's episode. But as the full episode, like, I just want to mention as an aside, and we're going to link it in the show notes, is so good. It's like a standalone podcast to listen to. It's really good. Again, it's episode 81 with the guests Zach Thielander and Alec Blenis. And Zach, many people probably know his name. He did CrossFit for a little bit competitively, and then as far as I understand, became this Olympic lifter coach, and now seems to be into music, which is awesome.
He's a musician, yep.
Yeah, and then Alec, he's got a very impressive background. I think he did his first ultra marathon at like 16 or something. I'm not going to get all the stats right, but he does hold the world record for Murph. He's a former Spartan pro. He did powerlifting for a while. I mean, he's jacked out of his mind, and now he's trying to get like a sub 2:30 marathon. So he's definitely kind of this hybrid athlete of sorts, which is certainly a popular word now. But the podcast is so good, and especially Alec from the nutrition point of view. And I just really loved it in part because I think he's something like 30. So his demographic's going to skew like 20-year-old men seeking like really awesome performance. And he's not doing this like hyper specific supplement stack or, you know, a 20-step morning routine.
Yep.
He basically, in terms of nutrition, describes the 3 pillars method. He's like, yeah, you got to eat some fruits and veggies, get some protein, which I know he doesn't subscribe to the 1 gram per pound, even though he's super lean and muscular, and then fill up your calories. And then after that, you just have to train your face off. And it just totally slams all of the silliness that I find people are focusing on. And I think it was Zach. There was 3 people on the podcast because of the host as well. So I might be misquoting a little bit. But then Zach jumps in too, and he's just talking about like how resilient the human body is and how much people can really train hard, including beginners. And it's way more about training hard and consistency than it is like the perfect training program or whatever goes viral on social media of like, these are the types of reps and rep schemes you need to do. And so just to hear them saying that, also knowing at the level at which they've operated and are operating at now, right? And obviously a different demographic, I'm like, oh my God, this is so amazing. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you 1,000 times. Thank you. But anyway, that's sort of the background, and definitely go take a listen.
Cool. And again, just because I think we only said it once, the Coach 'Em Up podcast.
Coach 'Em Up, episode 81. Yeah.
Coach 'Em Up. Got it. Where should we begin then, given that little bit of foundational understanding of where this came from? Shout out again to Pat Barber. Cardio fitness is better than nutrition. Where do we begin agreeing with that, disagreeing with it, debunking it, whatever we want to do with it?
Yeah, I mean, I basically started by tracking down where Alec has evidence for this discussion, right? And he actually has a really great Instagram post on this, but basically he uses these 2 different studies to make this point of cardiorespiratory fitness is really important, more so, let's say, than nutrition. And the first is this Mansagar paper in the show notes. They're looking at over 120,000 people over a period of 20 plus years, and they're looking at their cardiorespiratory fitness basically by testing them on a walking incline treadmill test. And they divided them into groups based on their performance, like low performance, below average performance, above average performance, and then high performance. So basically they divided into 4 buckets or 4 quartiles, basically bottom 25% and so on. And they look at what happened to them in terms of death and disease relative to their fitness level. And when looking at the risk of any cause of death between the high-performing individuals versus the low-performing individuals, the low-performing individuals were 3.9 times, that's 390% more likely to die from any cause. So said another way, for every 100 people who died in the high-performing group, 390 die in the low-performing group. Basically, cardiorespiratory fitness was a really strong predictor of longevity, right, or risk of death. And then he compares it to a study on ultra-processed food consumption and all-cause mortality. And this is the Fang paper, the show notes, and it's looking at about 115,000 people, so about the same number of people and over about 30-some years, and so almost about the same length of time. And they're looking at the ultra-processed food consumption and risk of death. And again, they divided people into kind of 4 buckets: low ultra-processed food consumption, below average ultra-processed food consumption, above average, and then very high ultra-processed food consumption. And again, if you look between the high and low buckets or the high and low quartiles, the high ultra-processed food consumption only increased risk of dying by 4%. So for every 100 people who died in the low ultra-processed food consumption, 104 die in the high ultra-processed food consumption. So there's a way, way, way smaller disparity when we look between these kind of high and low performers in terms of risk and death versus high and low consumers of processed foods. Now, there are some other studies like the Liang paper in the show notes, which do find a higher increased risk of death for people eating higher amounts of processed food than this 4%. Like I think the Liang paper is up around 15%. But I will say, what I learned looking at some of these papers is that there is some differences of opinion of whether or not to include alcohol in ultra-processed food. And so certainly that can change our risk. But nevertheless, the point remains the disparity between kind of these high and low fitness performers is a much greater disparity versus between people who are high and low ultra-processed food consumers. And I do think because we talk about dose so much on this podcast, without getting into the details here, yes, these are association studies and we can't perfectly understand the person's diet totally and whether or not it's exactly right for them. They do a lot of analyses in these association studies to try to adjust for things that they know could be a factor. So for example, they try to adjust for, or they do adjust in these studies for something like BMI, meaning they are trying to figure out, is this person at a more risk of death just because they have excess weight? Or are they able to kind of adjust for that and then say, no, it's more of a risk because of just the ultra-processed food consumption, not the excessive dose of ultra-processed foods. And so basically they adjust for these things. And so these increases that I've mentioned have already been adjusted for that, basically saying that when ultra-processed foods are eaten in the correct dose, the increased risk is relatively small, especially when we compare it to something like fitness capacity.
Okay. So given that, can our takeaway be that fitness is in fact more important than nutrition in pursuit of health?
Yeah. And so this is kind of the rest of the podcast, which is always worth going into instead of just a social media clip. Social media clips, I don't care how good they are, they're never going to tell you the whole story, right? But it's very clear, even in the comments, I think Alec was chiming in on a bunch of the comments, but also then just the rest of the podcast, it's very clear they are not arguing that nutrition is not important. What they are saying is there is more to be gained from a longevity perspective in working on becoming more fit versus obsessing about your nutrition, especially within the realm of what social media tries to get you to focus on. Like, you are better off working towards a 6-minute mile than you are worrying about your food dyes, artificial sweeteners, seed oils, and on we go. And it's like 1,000% yes, thank you. This is why I love this so much. And when Pat initially sent me this clip, and this is before I had watched even the full clip and even the whole podcast, and dove into the research for the claims, what I commented back to Pat was, yeah, Greg was really onto something with his stance that fitness is a measure of your health. And so for the non-CrossFitters out there, basically the founder of CrossFit, Greg Glassman, believed that fitness was the marker that we should track above all. meaning you want to see your mile time go down, you want to see your pull-ups go up over time, and those metrics across all the years tell us about your health, not necessarily your fasting glucose or not necessarily your weight, but tell me your mile times. Show them to me across 10 years. What are the number of pull-ups? Show them to me across 10 years. And this is why, to this day, whenever people are looking at their progress in nutrition, I encourage them to pick a fitness marker besides weight or body composition, like number of pull-ups, like number of push-ups. And Greg was nearly never focused on weight because he knew that when your mile time goes down and your pull-ups go up, your weight is moving in the direction of health. And it really wasn't until I left CrossFit that I found myself talking about weight as related to nutrition more than ever before. It was so fitness focused before that. He also knew, Greg, that when your mile time isn't going to go down, nor would you increase your pull-ups, especially across years, without having some baseline adequacy around nutrition. And so I think that's something that's so beautiful about CrossFit, this beautiful simplification of it all. And it's really powerful. And certainly it won't be true in all cases, but having a 6-minute mile as an example tells me a lot more about your health than somebody having a normal BMI as a comparison, right? Or even, quote, just being in a normal healthy weight range. And in fact, we have a really old podcast that we'll drop in the show notes on performance and longevity. And I remember when I was looking at it, I was a little bit surprised by the data at the time. But basically, there's these studies. They're, of course, association studies because they're done over a long period of time. But they were looking at really high-performing athletes, like Olympic-level athletes, elite runners, and basically showing that they have greater longevity than non-elite athletes. And I think this goes a little bit against the narrative that you hear, especially I know in the CrossFit community, these CrossFit Games athletes or pick your elite athlete of choice. What they're pursuing is at odds with their long-term health. Yet we have a good amount of research to say otherwise, that their high levels of fitness look to be health protective for longevity. And so I think the real risk for any of these very elite sporting endeavors that people do is less about necessarily cardiovascular health or stress on the cardiovascular system, anything like that. And it's way more related to overuse or like joint issues, right? Like you might need a knee replacement if you're like this ultra elite runner. And that the high level of stress that you expose yourself to for training is actually going to be more helpful from like a cardiovascular health and chronic disease prevention point of view.
All right. So you did mention at the top of that nutrition is still important. Nobody's saying that nutrition isn't important. Can we talk about that and where it fits into the calculus of what is necessary for health?
Yeah. I mean, to have this elite performance, you are going to need some nutritional needs. The nutrients are what drive energy creation. They are what drive protein synthesis. They are what drive, good bone density. So we do need some level of nutrition, and our essential nutrient needs, meaning we must obtain them from the diet for just like baseline living. We've got some baseline amount of protein that we need. That's the RDA. We've got some baseline amount of fat. And then we have to get these essential micronutrients, the 15 minerals and the 13 vitamins. Now, that baseline level that I just mentioned is not going to, quote, optimize health and fitness. In addition to that, I'm going to say that you're going to need enough carbs and a bit more protein than that baseline level for training, and especially training at a higher level than, again, kind of a typical sedentary job. Like if you want to have lots of pull-ups, be able to run really fast, we're going to need some level of carbs in there too. We're going to need more protein than the RDA. And then also my opinion, especially relative to health, but I would argue fitness as well, those carbs also need to include enough fiber, which is really going to have an implication on kind of your immune system function. So out of all of that, basically we're looking at, okay, you need these 3 levels of these macronutrients, protein, carb, and fat that cover your essential needs and your training, at least 30 grams of fiber, and of course getting enough of these 28 micronutrients, the 28 vitamins and minerals. Now, I know we've also talked about phytochemicals a lot. There are all these thousands of compounds in plant foods. Look, they're not essential. We think they're healthy. We might be able to put them in kind of the optimization bucket, but let's just sort of put them aside as like theoretically optimal, and that we really need for this like nutrition prowess, the 3 macros that cover our essential needs and our training levels. That will total up to a certain number of calories, at least 30 grams of fiber, and then these 28 micronutrients. And of course, the way I encourage people to do that was with my 3 pillars method. We get this baseline level of fruits and veggies, enough but not excessive levels of protein, and then round out your calories. And believe me, that's going to cover those macros just fine. Now, what I think is a nuance that we don't talk a lot about here is how different this will look for, let's say, your average CrossFitter versus someone like Alec. I don't know, just off the cuff. I mean, I don't even know. He's, I think, training for this marathon, right? But off the cuff, I would guess his caloric intake is somewhere between 4 to 5,000 calories. I work with a lot of clients who are going to be below 2,500 calories.
Yep.
So for Alec to get to 4,000 calories plus, the amount of fruits and veggies for like an 800-gram challenge are going to look like such a small percentage of his diet. He's got to get to 4,000. That might only be 400, right? So he's got to eat a lot. Right. Like he's going to have a lot more calories he needs that aren't going to be coming from that. Conversely, if I'm working with like, a 5-foot tall woman in her 50s doing, one shortish, and I don't mean that in a bad way, shortish workout a day, targeting 1,700 calories for weight loss, the fruits and veggies she's going to feel like all she's eating is fruits and veggies. It's going to be a much larger percentage of the total foods that she's eating. I will also say somebody like Alec has to, and this is where people are going to probably tune off the podcast, Alec is going to have to rely on some dose of processed foods to get to over 4,000 calories. Yes. You are not going to get there on broccoli and apples. And further, he does not want to get there on broccoli and apples. It's too much volume for him to logistically eat and then go train for a marathon. Not only just chewing through it, but like if you just ate 800 grams of apples, you're not going to be able to go run fast. It's just like, we've joked about before, you don't eat a can of beans and then go for a mile time trial.
The bean mile.
Yeah, it's just like logistically, that volume is just too excessive for them to go through all of the training sessions that they have. This doesn't mean he's never going to eat apples or never eat broccoli. It's just that fruit and veggie portion is a relatively small percentage when you look across his entire diet to get to over 4,000 calories. The other nuance that I want to point out, and I often mention this, but it really only matters for people in Alec's category, these processed foods do have some micronutrients in them. Of course, I don't advertise to go eat potato chips for potassium, but if you flip over a bag of potato chips, you're going to see that there's some potassium in there. Not as much as whole foods, but nevertheless there is there. So by way of the fact that he has to get to 4,000 calories, and assuming he has some whole foods in the diet, he will also likely get enough micronutrients. You want to think about it as he just has more opportunities, so to speak, because he gets so many calories to accumulate all the micros he needs, even though they might not be, quote, the most ideal source of micronutrients. Where someone who's eating fewer calories needs to be a little bit more judicious, if you will, in their choices because they don't get as many calories to cover all of those needs. And that's why their diet's going to skew more whole foods. But I do find that there's just so much dogma around natural is always better. It's something I believe for a long period of time. But no, hitting the right amount of nutrients for your goals and needs is better. And it turns out when you have a higher caloric need, it's way easier to hit all of the nutrients that you need just by way of the fact that you're eating more foods and you'll collect them across that. And you also are going to need some processed foods to get all the way there. Now, let me bring this back, though, to kind of more of my client, let's say somewhere in the intake of 2,000 calories a day. Mm-hmm. If they've hit their micronutrient needs, they've hit their vitamins and minerals, they've hit their adequate protein, they've hit enough fiber, and they have 200 calories left to get them to their total, macro needs for the day, they are not, quote, better off if they make those 200 calories from sweet potato instead of potato chips or instead of chocolate. If your other quality nutrient needs are met, being micros and fiber, it does not matter what those remaining discretionary calories are for. And I have to assure people of this in every single accelerator, formerly masterclass cohort. Again, the dogma is strong on this one. And it really is true that this is what we find is that we have some really basic, adequate nutrition needs to hit, and then we can kind of round out our needs with some discretionary calories. And one of the things too, just while I'm on this rant here, is if you go to something like the CDC or even the USDA for nutrition guidance, it's so basic. It basically says what I just said. It's like maintain a healthy weight, eat mostly whole foods, don't restrict anything. And people will criticize them and just be like, they're so minimal. They just don't even say anything at all. Mm-hmm. And it's like, they do. They actually say a lot. It's actually that you don't have to do as much nutrition as you think. We need to do some really basic things done consistently, and no, we aren't doing that. The only reason why we have got this podcast is because people say so many other crazy things in nutrition that are just not true. The hard part is not what we have to do. It's actually doing it in a modern, busy life surrounded by wall-to-wall processed foods.
I thought the only reason we had this podcast is because you like talking to me every week.
That's also true. So joke's on you, 400 episodes in. We're still chatting every week.
Let's maybe do a sort of a big takeaways from this conversation, from this, argument, if we want to call it that, between fitness and nutrition, from this podcast that sort of sparked the whole thing. What should we walk away with an understanding of or with a belief about?
Yeah, I kind of came away with like 4 takeaways. The first is the best is neither diet nor exercise. It's both. And there was actually a study on this comparing kind of people who follow a healthy diet and they're active versus people who follow a healthy diet and are inactive versus people who have an unhealthy diet yet are active versus, of course, people who have an unhealthy diet and are also inactive. This is the Kazemi paper in the show notes. And no surprise, the healthy diet plus being active reduce the risk the most of all-cause mortality. And I do want to, again, re-stress that this Coach 'em Up episode was ultimately saying that. It's not trying to say nutrition is not important. It's trying to say crazy nutrition obsession is not important. So that's the first one. The second one is a healthy diet is not particularly complicated, nutritionally speaking. My 3 pillars method will do this quite well for you. And if you join my accelerator in January, this is where I can really help you shut out the noise of all this silly stuff on social media that has you running in circles. That is not necessary for you to have this personal plan that works. You don't need special food pairings or special food choices or health tech devices.
Anytime special food comes in, it's just, no, you don't need it. Nothing with special food.
You don't need it. You don't need some specific type of spinach. You don't need some age-specific hack. Like, oh my gosh, like, stop. It's really quite simple. What's not simple is executing, and you might need some help with that. The third kind of takeaway is high-end performance means more calories and generally more processed foods to meet those caloric needs. If they want to do it on whole foods, fine, but more often than not, they're going to have to rely on some processed foods that, yes, they still need some quality foods in their diet. It's just going to be a smaller percentage. Their diet won't look, quote, as clean, yet ultimately they're still achieving their nutrient needs and probably by way of a type of food that is going to help them perform better because they're not running around on a stomach full of broccoli. And finally, I think we've talked about this one kind of recently, but just need to rehammer it. Cardiorespiratory fitness is awesome. You should need and want intensity in your exercise plan. We're talking about hard, vigorous activity. Breathe hard, regardless of your age, regardless of male or female. The complete nonsense I see, especially towards women, to stop high-intensity training because of cortisol, baloney, or whatever else is out there is gross. It needs to stop. I don't know exactly how men are targeted in this demographic, but I want to reiterate that walking with weight vests in resistance training to the exclusion of high intensity is not the answer. You can do all of it. You can rotate through these different modalities, lifting, cardio, etc. Do it consistently and challenge yourself, and that's really where the magic is.
Love it. 2 things before we go. Just a reminder about that accelerator that we mentioned a few times. Head to optimizemenutrition.com/accelerator to be notified about the January cohort. It's coming soon. And then the second thing is just make sure you're subscribed to the show wherever you're listening or watching this so you do not miss another episode. EC and I will be back next week for a brand new episode of The Consistency Project.